Thank you, everybody. If you want to take your seats. Thanks, everybody, for contributing to the service. It's the way it's meant to be. It's the way it's meant to be when we gather, that we all should be coming with an attitude of contributing. What can we bring rather than what can we take away from the service? So thanks, everybody, especially the band, for leading us as always. If you don't know me, my name's John. I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and we've been this year. We've been looking at the Gospel of Mark. Originally, I think we promoted it as being a deep dig into the Gospel of Mark, but we've realised as we've preached that it's actually a very cursory glimpse at the Gospel of Mark. We're leaving out far more than we're ever able to talk about. We're actually about at the halfway mark now. We're looking today at the end of Mark chapter 8 and Mark chapter 9, and the 16 verses in Mark, and so therefore we're about halfway through the series. But what you will notice now from round about this message onwards is that the pace of the narrative will begin to just slow down a little bit as we build up towards the Easter events, and so Mark's Gospel rattles along at a really hefty pace for the first kind of 8 or 9 chapters, and then it just starts to slow down, and that's what we'll be doing. I believe in the messages we'll be digging a little bit deeper as we look at the Easter story once again. I've got to start with a confession. I've been really a little bit cheeky today because I've pinched a bit of last week's chapter for this week's message. Now remember that when Mark was written, it wasn't actually written in chapters and verses. The chapters and the verses were decided upon many years ago. But I actually think that the end of Mark chapter 8 flows really naturally into the beginning of Mark chapter 9. And in fact, the events that are described at the end of Mark 8 and at the beginning of Mark 9 make more sense when they're all linked together. There's 3 kind of fairly distinct episodes that we're going to be looking at today, ending in Mark chapter 9. But as always, there's so much more that we aren't able to look at this week. So Mark chapter 9, after we've finished with what we're looking at this morning, then goes on to talk about a young boy who is healed by Jesus. And the boy's father comes out with words that I personally have found really helpful through all my Christian life, because Jesus says something to him like, if you believe, your son will be healed. And the father cries out, Lord, I do believe, help me in my unbelief. And I find that really helpful. I believe, but help me with what I struggle with. I think that's really good. We then hear the story that you may recall of the disciples arguing amongst themselves as to who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom, who was going to sit next to Jesus. There's that story, and then Jesus does some more teachings about sin and about the fact that we're meant to be the salt of the earth, and actually salt is no good if it loses its saltiness. So there's so much more in chapter 9 that we're going to be looking at. So as always, we just encourage you to look at your reading plans, to dig down yourself into the Gospel of Mark. It's just been I think it's been a really encouraging series. I have to say, I've loved the prep for this. The preparation has been really good. But today, we're really getting back to some absolute basics, because we're just going to be looking at who Jesus really is, what his ministry is really all about, and then we end with one of the most remarkable events of the whole of Jesus' earthly ministry. We end with what's called the Transfiguration. So that's where this is all leading to. But it starts at the end of Mark chapter 8. You can see there, I've called this the way of the cross, the path to glory. But it starts at the end of Mark chapter 8 with Jesus holding a quiz. Okay, so we're going to read Mark chapter 8 from verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, who do people say that I am? The disciples replied, well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. But what about you? Jesus asked. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, you're the Messiah. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. That's not the last time in our short reading today that we're going to see the instruction of Jesus not to tell anybody. We'll come on to that in a little while. So, this story starts with Jesus on the road, and he kind of gathers his closest followers around him. And as they're either kind of sitting around, perhaps having a coffee break, or as they're walking along, he asks them a question. Okay, you've been with me some time. There's lots of talk about me in the area. Who do people say that I am? Now, Jesus is not asking the question of his disciples for his own affirmation. He's actually asking the question so that they come to a real knowledge of who Jesus really is. That they'll be left in no question whatsoever, and we will be left in no question whatsoever about Jesus' true identity when we finish this morning. So, I imagine the first question that Jesus asked would have been asked at the time. You know, Jesus was incredibly popular still at this time of ministry. Thousands of people were coming to hear him. And I'm sure many people would be saying, well, I wonder who he really is. You remember last time I preached, we spoke about when Jesus went back to Nazareth. And we were saying that the people in Nazareth said to Jesus, who do you think you are? But now Jesus is saying, who do people say that I am? And I can imagine the disciples saying, oh, this is good, you know, we've heard about this. So one of them pipes up, well, somebody says you're John the Baptist, which is a bit odd, but anyway, because Jesus and John met each other, but never mind. And then another one said, well, I've actually heard that some people think you're Elijah. And then another one says, well, you know, trying to hedge his bets here, you're just one of the prophets, you know, like, so that the disciples are there. But then he personalizes it. And Jesus says, but what about you? That's a question I'd like to ask you today. What about you? What do you think about Jesus? Doesn't matter what anybody says, what I say, or Pete, or any of the other leaders. What do you think about Jesus? Who do you say he is? And as usual, it's Peter who jumps in first. But this time he scores the goal. This is a bullseye. He says, you're the Messiah. Wow. And Jesus acknowledges that. He doesn't contradict Peter, far from it. He lets the disciples know that he is indeed the Messiah, the chosen one of God, the person that was sent to save the world, the person sent to save the Jewish race in particular, the Jewish nation in particular. And Jesus said, but kind of keep this to yourselves. So Jesus says, yes, I am, but, you know, let's just keep this quiet. Now, straight away, after this revelation of Peter, I guess the disciples were probably more excited than they'd ever been. They'd seen amazing miracles. But when Jesus first says, yes, I'm the Messiah to his guys, I would imagine that they're thinking, this is the moment we've been waiting for. This is absolutely all we've been longing for. Jesus is now going to reveal to us his plans to completely restore the nation of Israel. He's going to tell us how we're going to drive out the Romans that have occupied us. This is what we've been longing for. I can't wait to hear the battle plan. I can't wait to read and hear from him how he's going to do it all. And Jesus does reveal his plans to his disciples, but they're not at all what they expected. Next slide. Because in verse 31 of Mark chapter 8, Jesus says this. Then Jesus began to teach them. This is straight after he's revealed that he's the Messiah. He began to teach them that the Son of Man, the Messiah, must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. He didn't pull his punches. And Peter took him aside. The audacity of the man is amazing. Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke Jesus. That's incredible, isn't it? But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. And he said, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Peter was on such a high. He was top of the class. He'd revealed that Jesus was the Messiah. A split second later, he's there rebuking Jesus, saying, "Lord, you don't know what you're doing. These plans that you've got about dying, I don't want to hear about that." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." What a rebuke back to Peter. you're not thinking about what God's thinking, you're just thinking about worldly things. Don't we do that so often? We think about the concerns of the world. We look at even Christian things and spiritual things, and we contextualize it in the way the world looks at things, rather than what is actually God's heart, what is God's mind. I genuinely think this was probably the time when Jesus most disappointed his disciples in the whole of the time that he was with them. Because he revealed that he was the Messiah. They thought he was going to do some amazing stuff. And straight away, he starts talking plainly about his death. Talk about highs and lows. But then it actually gets worse, because he doesn't just talk about his death, he begins to talk about the deaths of anyone who may want to follow him. Because then it goes on, next slide, thanks Stella. Then Jesus, note this isn't just the disciples this is addressed to. Jesus called the crowd to him, along with his disciples. So all the people that have been following, he gathers them there with the disciples. And he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? This is addressed to the whole crowd. Jesus said, I've got to die. And not just my 12 disciples, they're also going to die. But if you want to follow me, that's what it means for you as well. You've got to be prepared to lose your life and take up your cross. It's hard to understand in our context, because we've read this so many times, how shocking these words would have been to the people of the time. We've kind of sanitized the cross so much. I guess probably 50% of you have either wearing the cross at the moment or have got one at home. You know, lots and lots of people wear a cross as an item of jewelry. If you go to some really high churches, you'll see beautiful gold crosses embossed with precious stones, looking absolutely incredible. We endue the cross with kind of weird supernatural powers when we watch kind of Dracula films and Exorcist films. We actually don't recognize what the cross really was. It was simply a blunt, cruel instrument of torture and execution. There was nothing of beauty about it. There was nothing noble about it whatsoever. The cross was and is a vile, despicable thing. And the people hearing these words for the first time knew that because they saw them every day. It was a fairly common way of executing people, and it was always done in public. Just as a person living in the Middle Ages would recognize a gallows pole, or as someone living through the French Revolution would easily recognize a guillotine, the people that Jesus spoke to knew exactly what he was talking about when he spoke about the cross, and it was not something that in any way, there wasn't anything. There was nothing whatsoever of beauty about it. It was just the most atrocious thing that you could imagine. Jesus certainly wasn't and doesn't make it easy to follow him. He makes it really difficult. He does the opposite. I remember, I know Pete's mentioned this many, many times, but it's so true. And Pete's spoken about the difference between a cult and Christianity, where one is easy to join, but quite hard to leave. If you want to join a cult, it's really, really easy. But once they've got their claws into you, they make it really hard for you to go. We've seen evidence of that in some people at Hope House that have been involved in things, and it's been so difficult for them to put down the past life. Christianity is the opposite. Jesus makes it really flipping difficult to follow him. You know, he doesn't say, he does say, my yoke is easy and my burden's light. I have to say that. He does say, I've come that you'll have life in all its fullness. That there is some good news about this. But Jesus actually says, you want to follow me. You want to follow me. you've got to take up your cross. You've got to deny yourself. You've got to carry that cross for me. But if you become a Christian, if you want to leave, we here at Springs and no other churches I know, they don't kind of keep the hooks in you. If anything, we're perhaps almost too liberal. Sometimes we might be guilty of, we haven't seen somebody for a while, but we think, they'll be okay. We should perhaps do more following up than we do. Do remember that. It's quite important. A cult is easy to join, hard to leave. To become a Christian is a tough step of faith, but no one's keeping their claws in you once you've made that decision. We're guilty of sugar coating or soft soaping the gospel of Jesus, the call to be a Christian, because Christianity is not a lifestyle choice. That's not what it is. It isn't just saying, I've decided I'm going to try and live my life in this particular way. That's not being a Christian at all. Becoming a Christian isn't just some type of spiritual crutch that can help you through life's difficulties, even though it may do. But that's not what being a Christian is at all. Becoming a Christian is not a way in itself of dealing with anxiety. It's not in its most basic form. Being a Christian isn't even about living a joyful, peaceful, fulfilled life, although that's certainly a byproduct of being a Christian. But at its most basic, being a Christian is denying yourself, taking up your cross, and following Jesus wherever he leads. It's about letting go of the controls of your life and giving them to Jesus. Now, this isn't a three-stage process. Jesus doesn't say, look, if you want to follow me, the first thing you need to do is deny yourself. So try that for a while, and then if that kind of fits comfortably, then, perhaps take up your cross and see how you get on with that. And then when you've got used to the cross and you're used to denying yourself, then I'm going to ask you to follow me. It's a three-in-one process. You do the three things all together. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Follow Jesus. That's what becoming a Christian is. Now, let me tell you, denying yourself is not the same as self-denial. Denying yourself is not self-denial. Many self-help books or stuff you might read on the internet or in social media will talk about a lifestyle choice that you may want to take. Some people will say the best way to start your day is to drink a glass of warm lemon juice, water and lemon. Lots of people suggest that probably is very good for you. Some people will say your lifestyle should be don't ever eat carbohydrates after 6 o'clock at night. So you'll perhaps have that type of self-discipline. Do 10,000 steps a day. Eat 5 lots of fruit. Have some downtime. Have some me time. All of these self-help types of things about how to make your life better. That's nothing to do with denying yourself. That's self-denial. All top athletes practice self-denial. I saw Tricia running down our road the other day, self-denying herself. She was kind of pushing herself because she wanted to run. All athletes practice self-denial. They exercise, they have eating regimes, they practice what they're doing, but they're doing it ultimately for their own glory. They're doing it because they can see a prize, and if I follow this exercise and training regime, if I eat healthily, eventually I might get that gold medal. Or I might get the mega bucks that come with the success of being a successful athlete. There is self-denial, but it's not denying yourself. Denying yourself is basically putting Jesus first, others second, and yourself last. That's what denying yourself is in all things, and it's not easy. And it's not just, I'm going to really grit my teeth, I'm going to try and pray, I'm going to, I'm going to fast, or I'm going to read my Bible more, I'm going to pray more, I'm going to come to church more often. Those things are good in themselves, but that is not denying yourself. That's self-denying. You're doing it for your own good, those things in many ways. Denying yourself means putting Jesus first, others second, and yourself last. And part of denying yourself involves taking up your cross. Now, like me, you've probably all heard the expression, we've all got our cross to bear. You heard that? Have you ever used it? I've perhaps been guilty about using that phrase. and you might be talking about your dodgy knee. Oh, we've all got our cross to bear. Or that person that's in your life that annoys you and drives you to distraction, but they're still in your life, and, well, it's just the cross that I have to bear. You can even use it about the football team you choose to follow, and I certainly felt yesterday afternoon, that was my cross to bear. But that really trivializes it. That is not what Jesus is talking about at all when he talks about taking and carrying your cross. Because taking and carrying your cross means completely losing control of your life. That's what it means. If you were condemned and you were told you'd got to carry your cross, you lost total control. You weren't in control of your life. You couldn't practice self-denial to make yourself feel better. You couldn't kind of rely on things like that. You were going one way, and that was to the execution place. You had no control, and you just knew that you were about to experience the most agonizing of deaths imaginable. That's what cross carrying is all about. Jesus is making it really tough for us today, isn't he? This is hard, but he's saying, if you really want to follow me, forget your lifestyle choices, forget the feel-good factor. This is denying, carrying, and following. So that's what I'm offering you today. Humiliation, pain, and death. Anybody want to sign up for it? Well, yeah. It's not the easiest sell, but this is the most important thing of all. The cross was not Jesus' final destination, and it is not our final destination either. Jesus is not calling us to a martyr's death. He's calling us to live a martyr's life. That's really important. He's not calling us to a martyr's death. He's calling us to live a martyr's life, because Jesus knew that the only way for us to gain our lives was for us to lose them. Wealth, popularity, pleasures will all fade away with the passing of time. And the one thing about any of those things is they can't be taken. They can't be taken into the next world. It's no good being the richest man ever in hell. It's no good being the most popular man ever in hell. It's no good being the person with the most friends in hell. You can't take those things with you. But actually, denying yourself, carrying your cross, and following Jesus are all things that transfer into the next life. Jesus loves us so much, he himself was prepared to go to the way of the cross. In Hebrews 12:2, it says, "For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." For the joy set before him is the key word. The cross is not the destination. It's a passing point. It's a vital passing point. It's one that you can't bypass, but it's still only a passing point. Paul put it this way in Corinthians. He said, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." Paul said, what I'm going through in this life is light and momentary. Paul was beaten, flogged, shipwrecked, imprisoned, ultimately executed for his faith. But he still says they're light and momentary. Whatever cross you are carrying today is not your final destination. It's not your final destination. It's momentary. It may not seem like it, but it is. Anyway, we're nearly out of time because we're having communion, and I haven't even gotten to chapter 9 yet. But we're only going to scratch this surface, I promise you. So let's just look at what happens immediately, because this is so important. After Jesus kind of says, "Who do you think I am?" and then he talks about the lifestyle and carrying cross. This is where it leads, because it leads to this story of the transfiguration. After 6 days, so just 6 days after Jesus did this teaching to them, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared with him Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Can we just have the next picture on, please, Stella? I'll just put that picture on just to try and help you. That's about the best I could find just to try and visualize actually what happens. It's hard to imagine what this transfiguration was, but you can see there at the kind of back of the picture, Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah and Peter, James and John at the front. So hopefully that helps. But this is not Jesus going up a mountain and standing in the spotlight. You know, if you went out today to the top of the Malvern Hills and stood on the top of the hills with this glorious sunshine, you know you'd be in bright light. But that was nothing what Jesus was experiencing. It was actually the light shining out of Jesus, not onto Jesus. And actually, and I know I've said this before, but it's so true, the light shining out of Jesus wasn't actually the miracle. Because that's what his true nature is. You want to know what Jesus is like? That's what he's like. You know, the transfigured, the glorious Jesus. The miracle is that for 33 years, he hid and shrouded and clothed that light in an earthly body. We can see Peter, James, and John there. Now, they were probably Jesus' closest followers, and that's probably why he took them. Although when I was doing some preparation, one commentator rather cheekily said, well, actually, the reason that he took Peter, James, and John up the mountain were that they were the three disciples he couldn't trust on their own. You know, Peter was the outspoken guy, and James and John, let's forget, are called the sons of thunder. So, like, kind of, Jesus said, "You three, you come with me because I'm keeping you close to me. The rest of you, you'll be all right, but I'm not trusting you." I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily what it was. I think the Bible makes it clear that there was a special relationship there, but it did amuse me. Now, note also, Peter, James, and John straight away knew that the people talking with Jesus were Moses and Elijah. How do you think they knew that? I don't think they got lanyards on with kind of, "Hi, I'm Moses," or "Hi, I'm Elijah, you know, pleased to meet you, have a nice day." I think this proves the answer to a question that sometimes we ask ourselves: will we recognize each other in heaven? Of course we will. They knew straight away that who these guys were. Automatically, when we are in heaven, we will, I'm convinced, know each other. I think it was Charles Spurgeon that said, "You actually think that you're going to be thicker in heaven than you are now? You recognize people on earth, you're certainly going to recognize them in heaven." And this is a real blessing to pastors. Pete, I've got some great news for you and me this morning. When you get to heaven, you'll automatically know everybody's name, and you won't forget it. And you'll also know how to pronounce it properly as well, which can be quite a challenge for pastors. So, Jesus is there with Moses and Elijah. And we know from Luke's account of this story that actually Jesus was talking with Moses and Elijah about the events that were about to happen. He was talking to them about going to Jerusalem. He was talking to them about being crucified. And then, as always, Peter has to open his mouth again. He doesn't kind of learn, does he? Can we have the next slide, Stella? And this is where we bring this down to land. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And then I love this. It says this. He didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. So he just opened his mouth and blurted something out. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." How often when we don't know what to say do we open our mouth and say the first thing that comes into our head? Now, the Bible makes it clear that there are times in our lives when actually we don't need to worry about what we're going to say because God's going to give us the words. But that's really in the context of when we're representing Jesus. It doesn't mean when we're just kind of walking down the road with our mates that every single word that ever comes out of our mouth is exactly what God planned us to say. So don't forget that. But I just think this is amazing. But actually what Peter was doing was he was putting Jesus on the same level as Elijah and Moses. And that's when the cloud appears. And that's when the loud voice of God booms out. "This is my son whom I love. You listen to him." God was saying there, Jesus fulfills the law that Moses gave. He fulfills all the prophets which Elijah represented. But he's the Son of God, and he is over both the law and the prophets. He is higher than both Moses and Elijah. And then the last few verses we're going to read. Verse 8, please, Stella. "Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders again not to tell anyone what they'd seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead." They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. I just love the ending to that story as well. So they're coming back down, and Jesus said, look, don't say anything to anybody until you've seen me rise from the dead. And Peter, James, and John said, okay, Lord, we've got that. And then Jesus just kind of wanders a little bit away from them, and the three of them are saying, what's he mean by that? What's rising from the dead? What's he mean by that? So that's really all I want to share with you this morning, this journey of Jesus revealing his true identity and then saying, yeah, I am the Messiah, but I'm not going to be leading an army to boot the Romans out. I'm actually talking about, if you want to follow me, you've got to go the way of the cross. You've got to deny yourself. You've got to take up your cross, and you've got to follow me. We're going to move into a time of communion now. But I can't preach a message like this without giving you the opportunity to respond. And really, I just want, as we take communion, we're also going to play a video of a lovely song called The Power of the Cross, and we'll just come and receive communion in a moment. But I want to ask you two questions. Firstly, if you know that you've never responded to Jesus, if you know that you're not really a Christian, and something today, even though it's been a hard message about, following me, taking up your cross, denying yourself, if you've never done that, you can put yourself right with Jesus right here and now. But also, for those of us, and I'm absolutely including myself in this, absolutely, we may have been Christians a long time, but if we're honest, we're not really living our lives, denying ourselves, carrying our crosses. And we might be following Jesus a bit, but we might be following him to the areas that we actually really enjoy going anyway. Perhaps as we receive communion today, you need to recommit to Jesus and to actually say, Lord, I love you and I've followed you and I've tried to serve you, but if I'm honest, that self-denial, that's tough. There's still stuff I'm clinging on to, the stuff that I'm putting myself before you and other people in. I know I've got to lay it down. Perhaps you've got to say, I'm frightened of this cross, this stuff that I'm going through. It's so hard, Lord. But this is the way you want me to go, so I'm going to carry that cross because it's the cross you gave me, and I'm going to accept that your burden is going to be light. Perhaps today it's just a matter as you come out and receive communion that you're going to say simply to Jesus, I'm going to follow you wherever you lead. Perhaps somebody here today, you know that Jesus is calling you somewhere, and today he's confirming you've got to follow me because I'm telling you that way. So we're going to have a time now of communion. I'll just lead us into the communion. There's some space here at the front. What I'm doing today, we're not going to bring and serve the elements to you. We're going to ask you to come out as you want. There's going to be bread and wine. I think George and Rob, I think, are coming out just to oversee the distribution of the bread and the wine. So take your time. Make your own response to Jesus. But I'll just pray, and then we'll go into communion. And then if we can get the video teed up, please, Stella. Father, we thank you for your word to us today. We thank you that you tell us that we have to deny ourselves and carry our crosses and follow Jesus. And we know that that is all that Jesus himself did. So as we gather around your table this morning, we thank you for the power of the cross of Jesus. A thing of shame, but a thing that is now so powerful. We thank you that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took, after a meal together with his followers, a simple loaf of bread and broke it and said, this is my body that is given for you. Eat it in remembrance of me. And then he took a cup, a flagon of wine, and he poured some wine to his followers and he said, this is my blood of the new covenant. Drink this in remembrance of me. So as we gather around your table, Lord, we pray that this bread will be to us the body of Jesus, that this wine will be to us the blood of Jesus. Father, your word tells us that we need to examine ourselves before we take it. So in the quietness, as we listen to a song, we reflect for the next few moments on the message today. Thank you for helping us to carve out this time so we can respond to you in whatever way you want. So it's all ready. If Rob and George can come and just help us. Stella, if you want to put the video on, we're going to just sit and listen to this song. The words are going to come up. And I just ask you to come and take the bread and the wine. If you want to take it and eat at the front here, if you want prayer, we'll do that. If you want to take it back to the pew and eat and drink in the pew, that's fine. If there's somebody with you that isn't actually able to get to the front, could you pick up a wine and some bread and take it back to the people you're sitting with? But let's just this is about 5 minutes song, so we've just got 5 minutes as we gather around the table of God, this to receive communion. Let's just worship him as we go through this next part of our series. Thank you.